So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Welcome to our first in-studio Scaffold event, not for this year, but for the coming back and return from the big lockdown. As you might know, this is a hybrid event, so we are broadcasting this online as well. So just wanted to say hello to everyone joining us live. Sorry. So we'll have some people arriving. For the people online, some housekeeping. We have our studio manager, Blake, who will be managing the chat. So say hello and we'll welcome some comments from the online audience later on. Some agenda for today. So welcome everyone to the studio. Before we move on to our main discussion with our presenters, we will give a little bit of frame of why Scaffold is hosting this event. This is certainly not the first time that we're talking about workplace interiors and what workplaces will look like in the future, but I think as much as people try to answer that question, it's still very much relevant, and it's very exciting to know what will be happening in the next year. And our main presenters, James Calder and Bronwyn McColl from Bagot and James Calder. For the online audience, so Blake will be moderating that. If they have any questions, just drop them into the questions tab. We'll get to those at the end, and for the live audience as well, we'll I was going to say pass the mic around, but we'll just speak very loudly and just speak up and shout out your questions. So with workplace interiors, why are we talking about this and what we're preparing as a supplier? Obviously, we're not designers, but we can help to create some tools for designers to be able to prepare the workplace for the changes that are coming. These are two product lines that we're working on. They are in development, so we don't have many details, but this is just a sneak preview that we literally kind of stole from our products team in development. So the first one is our Click on Screens products, which is coming in improved, better functionality. And it is to address the question of people coming back to the workplace in these big open spaces with a lot of people around after a couple of years of being home alone with all the privacy and all this space to yourself. So the screening will allow people to have a little bit more privacy while still being part of the bigger whole. Second thing that we're working on is we are known for our feature ceilings, and they're typically found in the high traffic, high use public areas, so such as atriums, receptions, entrances. And that's great for people entering the space, but a lot of the times the cost can be more prohibitive to extend that look and luxe feel into more functional areas like workspaces. So we are developing a product which is our ceiling system. It will be significantly more cost effective, allowing designers to extend the look and feel throughout larger areas. So this is not the finished product. This is literally inspiration board from our products team. So this will be coming out in start and mid 2022. So that's a sneak preview of what we're working on. And now I'll just introduce our main presenters. So I believe James will be going first. James is Global Director of Iroko. So very accomplished, so I'll have to read it, otherwise I might forget some details.
God, we're going to be here all night. Just the highlights.
So he's a practitioner, facilitator, and author and part-time educator interested in all facets of strategy, design, and the use of learning and workplace environments. He has extensive experience in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, and the world's prominent organizations across many education types, and most business sectors include a broad experience with the public sector. Notable projects such as NAB 700 Burke Street, Macquarie Shelley Street, and 50 Martin Place, and all driven by James's design thinking. He has worked with several government organisations, including Hong Kong Science Park and Banger Delivery Authority, as well as on a smaller scale, working with global furniture companies to develop new products. James has undertaken building a master plan briefing and planning projects with many Australian universities, including Adelaide, Melbourne, New South Wales, and Deakin universities, as well as working for European institutions such as Cambridge University and Trinity College in Dublin. He has a wide-ranging understanding of specialist facilities such as the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute in Adelaide. And his presentation will be followed by Bronwyn McColl, Principal and Workplace Design Leader from Wood's Bagot Melbourne studio. She's currently working in NDA Workplace Portfolio and Mixed-Use Commercial Town in Auckland and a Monash University Workplace. Bronwyn sees conventional approaches to design giving way to more inspired interiors, those that are driven by focus on user experience and changes in client ambitions, and those combining strategic thinking and cross-sector influences. Bronwyn's design career comprehensively spans sectors where user experience is paramount and nowhere more so where commerce, culture and retail come together. Her workplace experience includes the recently completed Gilbert and Tobin workplace fit out, which I believe we will see in this presentation. Oregon King 25, which is housed in Australia's tallest and largest engineered timber office building, and number 1 Million Street in Brisbane, a project that holds the most significant change in government workplace, spanning over 41 levels and housing nearly 7,000 employees. So welcome. We'll pass over the stage to our speakers.
Thank you. For those not here, there's a wild storm going on out there. I think we'll be all right. I'll probably need to just click on this. There we go. So it's great to be able to get out of home and meet people face to face again. But we've had a bit of a go at like the roadmap over the last couple of years of COVID, and it's been an up and down journey, particularly in Melbourne. Who remembers the 6-foot circles and how that was going to solve? Yeah, it's kind of fun. But look, I think it's important to take a global view of this. So when we ask the question, what's going to get people back? If you're in China, you'd say, what do you mean? Because nobody's gone away. It's just absolutely sailed through a few lockdowns here and there, but you know they know how to lock down hard, and they've pretty much eradicated most variants. So you know, no real change. Places in Europe, West Coast America, like Australia, you know, if you're in Adelaide or Perth, very little change at all. So it's very different in different places around the world, and the experiences are very different. But the thing that is starting to happen now, and you know, whether you're in the West Coast of America or in Melbourne, is just the length of time that this has gone on. So we're starting to hit, you know, 2 years now, and in some ways we've kind of forgotten what it was like. So you know, maybe in the first comeback from lockdown we go back to some sort of normal, but it's now been so long we've kind of forgotten some of this stuff. And you know, in some ways these sorts of questions, and don't take offense, but you know, they're hard to answer because they're both kind of ambitious in what they're trying to solve as a problem, but they're also pretty short-sighted because there's been some long-term changes, and just to think in the next 3 months is not out. And I actually like this quote from Bill Gates about you know, and he was obviously one of the people that predicted a pandemic, unfortunately correctly, that we sort of overestimate what's going to happen in the next 2 years and underestimate the next 10. And I think this is a pretty good quote for people doing fit outs, particularly in the corporate world, because we're usually, you know, in this compressed 3 to 6 month period, or even weeks sometimes, where you've got to make a lot of decisions, but then it lasts for 10 years, and we should be trying to make them last longer than just the old 10-year lease cycle from a sustainability point of view. So I think there's a really interesting thought process, and look, you know, this isn't that long ago. You know, that young, I'm assuming, daughter is, you know, probably still in the workforce today and using a mobile phone and working from home. So we've actually known a lot about what the future is going to be in terms of the way we could work, but it's painfully slow to evolve, and suddenly we can start to change. We did some research, you know, this is now 13, 14 years ago. You know, there are owls, and they get really grumpy if you wake them up early and want them to come to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. And there are larks who love getting up early, and that's their most productive time. I reckon most designers are owls rather than larks from most of the studios I've worked in. But, you know, we wrote this piece around perhaps we could be more humane and you know, design to the biorhythms of people and maybe have 2 shifts. And we could solve some of the transport issues. I mean, it is madness, isn't it? Getting everyone to come in for the same 8-hour period and all the investment and infrastructure and all of that. So, there have been lots of ideas, but painfully slow to change. And another old idea is this idea of portfolio careers. And a guy called Charles Handy first postulated this 25 odd years ago, if not longer, about why do we just have one job? Why can't we work 3 days on one thing and dial up and down the different aspects of our life? And some of the data with the great resignation that's being called that we're going through now is actually a lot of people, particularly in the US, are going to do their own startups. They're not leaving to go somewhere else. They're actually leaving to start their own business and work for themselves, which is now entirely possible, given how we work. So there's some pretty big, potentially beautiful questions as designers we should be asking about. Not how do we get everyone back and just perpetuate what we were doing before, but what sort of future do we want to create? And how do we use COVID as an opportunity to accelerate in what we're doing? And, if I had to say one thing about what is the office going to be, in many ways, the stuff we used to go to an offsite for, get people together, hit the whiteboard, break bread together, is kind of one obvious thing that the actual office is going to be for. As people spend more time working remotely. And yet they're pretty badly designed for that mostly. They're mostly still ABW or rows of desks. So there's some fundamental changes. And if you read the theory about a good offsite, you start planning 60 days in advance. Now, imagine all these teams coming one day after another, 60 days to plan each day. You're going to need an army of people to actually facilitate all of this, which is a massive change. So I kind of think we're actually in this period of this great relearning about, because of this long time frame, what are we going to be designing for? And relearning and unlearning and asking some big questions about what we could be doing. So one of the things we do in Irico is lots of data from the furniture scale to the city scale. And at the moment, we don't have a lot of data. And people that are running property groups just don't know. So everyone's reluctant to spend money on new leases, new fit outs, until we actually know what the future's going to look like. So, we're looking at the city scale of movement patterns and the impacts of COVID on the commute times and movement. We're looking at buildings and how we're going to have to reprogram buildings with more of this off-site sort of space. And we're looking at the new personas, emerging work styles and lifestyles of people to try and help our clients sort of give some evidence to what this is going to be, rather than, just assuming we're going to go back to how we worked before. So, our team is very much about how do we advance humanity through place is our area. We're not into finance or other things. It's through place. So we think this is a fabulous opportunity. And the key is getting lots of different people in the room. So this is our little group of people, which is incredibly diverse. So we've got anthropologists, brand strategy people, data scientists, and this is the kind of think tank of people you need to actually start thinking about this new future. And we've only been going, we started just before COVID. We're now up to 60 people. We're now also added Shanghai and San Francisco to that list. And we've got about 30 vacant positions at the moment. So there's clearly a lot of thinking and strategy work going on. And I'll now hand over to Bronwyn, who, this has all been very high level, but Bronwyn will start to talk much more practically about some of the work that her and her team are doing.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Lovely to be in a room with people again. It's so nice to, James and I were reflecting that we're not just talking to a screen. It's great to have the hybrid model as well. So hopefully you can hear me all right over the storm. As I said, yeah, it's fine. We can project our voices and then we're going to compete with this. But I thought to complement James's kind of big thinking ideas, I thought we might talk a bit about how these questions have changed. And so James and I have been doing a lot of work over the last 2 years in our workplace strategy and engaging with a lot of people across a range of organisations and sectors. And it's really interesting how we usually have to start this conversation. We're trying to push people to think differently, but because they're already living in a different world and starting to have this idea of the relearning themselves and understand what does that look like, they're already changing their questions to us, which is fantastic because it's the first moment in time that we're seeing this as a cohort. So as James mentioned, we recently completed Gilbert and Tobin in Melbourne, and this was started and designed pre-COVID. We then went into construction during COVID. So we then had a moment to pause, and we were really lucky with Gilbert and Tobin. They said, hang on, let's just check, are we on track with this? This is a big deal. We did the circles. We all the circles were good. We are a legal firm, so whilst they were open plan, they were quite generous in their spacing. So we ticked that box, and then they actually went further and said, what are we doing for our people? But what is really interesting about that, it was even before COVID, Gilbert and Tobin were talking about pushing the status quo. And so it was really about, why do we put things in certain locations? Why are we doing what we're doing? And I guess that's part of today's discussion is for designers, we really do need to now challenge, and as we always do, go back to first principles, but thinking about, why do we do things a certain way? As James said, why do we turn up to the office? What are we actually hoping to get out of that experience? So Gilbert and Tobin, this is their boardroom, which actually sits off to the side. They're in 101. They don't actually have their boardroom out to the main view of the river or to the gardens. That was a very deliberate shift for them. This is their reception, and you move through to what is their work club. This is for their staff and for their clients to intermingle together and work together. Being a staff member or a client, you can come and use this space, work in this space. It's highly flexible. They already knew that they were changing the way they worked. They'd been quite groundbreaking in the past and were looking to push that in the future. So what did that mean for them? So it was a pretty bold move as a legal firm to say, our most important part are our people and our clients, and together they can use this space. So for them, it was about shifting the focus of a legal firm. And in this club lounge, which you're starting to see in more types of workplaces now, the idea of the secret bar that's revealed, it transitions from day to night to functions, as Sculpt Form's studio does as well. So they started to push the boundaries in those spaces, really giving them flexibility. But the deeper conversation was about, what is your core function? And for them, it was about making their clients feel really welcome, for their employees to feel really welcome, and for them to both feel like it was an extension of their own space. So this was why this came to fruition. And so we are really seeing organisations now talk about, what are these values and how do they actually play out, and how do you reflect them in an authentic way? We've often talked about it at a high level, but really starting to integrating it fundamentally through everything you do, not just in a tokenistic way. So for one part of Gilbert and Tobin, Danny was one of the founding signatures of the Uluru Statement. So for him, part of his mandate with Gilbert and Tobin is that they only have Indigenous and Aboriginal art. So for them, that was a fundamental piece for them. They do commission some stunning pieces, so this was part of their fundamentals. But this table here is by Manapan Furniture. So again, looking to extend that beyond what they sort of understood. This incredible piece of artwork is a Rene Recchi, and that was a commission that they did, and it does say always through the back of it, and it's absolutely stunning when you see it in person. Quite evocative and provocative in the space, and that was really intentional from Gilbert and Tobin. So it was a pleasure to be a part of that experience. But understanding the power of experience for both your employees as employers, but also your clients. This is a project that we did with ABN Group in Perth. They're a construction development and finance organisation, and for them it was about showcasing what they do and also being able to have spaces for their clients and their employees to feel really comfortable. They had this quite cute saying about because they create homes and the home among the gum trees, and so this was 5 levels of sort of being home among the gum trees, and what does that mean in an authentic and modern way. This is part of their client space, so again really looking at how they leverage great experiences, but you'll see all the way through there is that residential quality, there is that really familiar and friendly space. And so for them, understanding that people were going to be in more hybrid models, how do we make them feel comfortable when they're at work? It feels a bit like an extension of home, but still somewhere where you're really proud to bring clients and all of those things. So I think it really is an important part of what you can see through here. So they were talking about what does it mean to belong, and that idea of around if you are going to invite people into your home or your work home, what does that look like, and what do you need to create to allow people to feel like they belong? And that's something that James and I talk a lot about in strategy, is about how do people feel a real sense of belonging. And that's something that I think as designers we can explore a lot more as we speak to things like diversity inclusion. What does that mean, and not just one person's type of belonging? And that's going to be really important as we transition back into the workplace, because not everyone's going to want the same things from their workplaces. So how do we do that in an authentic way? This is another really interesting hybrid space that is within ABN. And again, it's looking at, to James's point, it is like that offsite. So when you do come back into the workplace, what sort of spaces do you want? And these are the sort of spaces that we're seeing that you don't have in a traditional office, you don't have at home, and that will bring people back in together. You can ideate, you can create, and you can start to expand on what it is for people to be in a workplace. And this is their ground floor lobby, but it's about this idea of the sunken lounge of the 70s home sort of was referenced in this space. So again, it's those playful and whimsical things as well. We don't need it to all be quite so serious. We've had enough of that in the last 2 years, and I think that is something that you're seeing a shift of as well, that organisations are feeling they can bring out their personalities more. And so there was this other really lovely quote from the client for ABN that they talked about. They wanted to be intrinsically connected. They wanted their people to feel comfortable, and they wanted to be proud to share their workplace. And so I think that's part of the conversations as we talk about what's going to bring people back into the workplace, is having that sense of pride. James talked about the Great Resignation. There's all these terms coming around at the moment, but it is about how people align their own core values to organisations and to their workplaces. So, yeah, as James said, this has been nearly 2 years now, and what have we learnt from that? And I think that's going to be a big part of our conversations with our clients in the new year, and not coming up with all the answers, and knowing that it is actually going to be a process, and people have had different experiences, and so how do we adapt with that? This is Goodman in Sydney, and we're actually working with them on some other adaptive reuse projects at the moment, but they are developers. They own a lot of assets which are industrial, light industrial, and heritage buildings. So this for them was about living their values. And so this being a heritage building, they've created their beautiful workplace within this precinct, showing their clients that they would live and work in these places. And so how could that work for other organisations? They've created these sort of indoor-outdoor spaces within their workplace. So this is their kitchen zone, which is in the centre, and brought in some beautiful big trees, and looking at the way that they can incorporate biophilic design and those other elements into the space. But it really was about living their values as an organisation and showing that they believed what they were working on, and how do we, bring that to the forefront for their clients. As I mentioned, there's the Great Resignation, the Great Alignment, the Great Realignment, the Great Learning, the Great Reassessment. That's all happening at the moment, but I think it just shows we are all human. We've all gone through this moment of vulnerability and reconsidered about what are our values, what's important, why are we doing what we're doing. We do all spend so much time at work, and so it does need to resonate with us. And so from that perspective, I think it is important that we have those deep and meaningful conversations with our clients and understand why their organisations exist. And for Goodman, it was about really bringing in those opportunities through their work to show that they could, from a sustainability perspective, rejuvenate spaces, that they could really live their values through the work that they do. And I think you're going to see that more with other organisations. I think it would be such a wasted opportunity if we didn't. So there's this lovely notion now that we can have deeper conversations. As Kate mentioned in the introduction, we've also been very fortunate to work with the NDIA group over the last 6 to 7 years now, working on their workplace, and James and I work together on the strategy. And they have, given that they are the National Disability Insurance Agency, their mandate for us was to create world's best inclusive design. So look at universal design principles. We wanted to create a workplace where everyone felt really comfortable, could bring their whole self to work, felt like that they were connected to a community, and that their disability or their abilities were not holding them back from being who they wanted to be. And so this was a really important piece to us that we've been going through and learning and understanding about universal design principles, what different people's experiences are, and the nervousness and hesitation. And that's something, as James said, we've been around 2 years now at home, and we've relearned the way that we work. And so for people to come back, there is an anxiousness because you get set up at home. If you're going to come back into the workplace, how do we make sure that we have all of these things in place? So this has been a really important part for us. And I think whilst it's, this is part of the NDIA's approach, the universal design principles should apply to all workplaces to make sure that we are ensuring that people are well supported through their workplace. But it's an absolute pleasure to be able to kind of meet the range of people that work within their organisation and understand firsthand from them how that informs the way they work. We also talk about leading by example and in an authentic way. This is SLR Workplace up in Sydney, and they're an environmental consultants agency. So for them, a new workplace, they didn't want to be seen to be not living their values as well. So this was a really beautiful project that was about only putting in what you actually needed. It was in a beautiful heritage building as well. So how do we respect that, respond to that? They're also growing and changing as a consultancy business. They don't know how they're going to be in a few years. How do we give them inherent flexibility as well? And so I guess that's to a point that all of us are going through now, the unknown. If we don't know where the 10-year lease will be, will people be signing up for bigger leases? Will they be signing up for short term? Are they downsizing, upsizing? None of that we know. So how do we help to design inherent flexibility? And I think some of that will become in embracing that change and not being so prescriptive about the way we explore spaces. So this has a lot of flexibility, demountable pods that can move around to help them move through. And so when we start to, as we wrap up and get into discussion and talking about what do we see the workplace of the future looking like, I've also got the very fortunate role of being part of the hotel sector and heading that up regionally with a couple of other my colleagues. And so I love this duality that the two sectors that I absolutely adore, being workplace and hotel and luxury residential, all coming together, and they've all become this big melting pot. So this is the work club for Next Hotel, which again we completed in COVID. It was the strangest feeling ever to complete a hotel, and it sat there for quite a while with no one, but it's now back open, so you can go check it out. This is their part of their club lounge, so they're a business hotel. So they were really about, we want the modern business traveller to be able to come in, feel really comfortable. They can work here all day if they want to. It does have the dining, it does have the lounge, but it's quite different to any other workplace, and this was quite deliberate for them to actually look at a different way of working. This is their part of their reception lounge. The table is kitted out with power and data. They want people to come and relax in that space and enjoy it and work. And it's quite different from what you've seen in the past. And I guess it was the same kind of brief that we got from the guys at Sculpt Foreman about how does their future workplace look like. And this space really was about a studio space that would be inviting, that you could work. We've been fortunate enough in between lockdown to bring a various range of clients in. They've all said, oh, that's our brief. We want it to feel like Sculpt Form, just like a workplace you've never seen before. And I think people are now daring to think big and be brave about what their future workplace could look like. It doesn't just have to be white walls. And in fact, bringing in natural materials, bringing in those plants, it starts to really speak to us as humans. So I think as we open the discussion, James and I always love a good tricky question if you've got some, but I think it would be, hopefully this has sort of been a bit of a salt of ideas and thinking around what we should be asking our clients, what we should be thinking of. And as James said, not wasting this opportunity, because we have just been through the world's sort of largest social experiment over the last 2 years. It would be a shame to see that go to waste, and we want to see some good come of it. And I think that should be about rethinking how we work. So
thank you very much. There was some very inspiring projects there. Would you like to take a seat?
Sure.
So we'll take some questions from our online audience and live audience as well. So if you've got any, pop up. But I actually thought I'll kick it off. It's quite a big topic that we all debated. We even hosted an event here back in April this year, which was the future of commercial property design, where we speculated what the future will look like, and at that time thinking it's all behind us and we can move along. I wanted to ask, from that time period to now, has your outlook changed, and in what way, as we imagine new places then and now?
Can we go first?
Yeah.
Sure. All right. I don't think it's changed for me. It feels like we're at a moment in time where I guess maybe because we're in the design industry and you had always seen there were very different ways of working. So for me, I always struggled with why people had to prescribe to a 9 to 5. So for me, that had already kind of shifted in my thinking. And so we often talk about where buildings could go and where workplace could go without the constraints of budgets or clients. So we kind of think big and then have to come back into what sort of the reality of the market's doing. But I think for me, it's always been an opportunity and something that I'm really excited to be a designer at this moment in time to see what's possible. So I don't think it's shifted. Probably just accelerated my excitement to kind of test what's next.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing about commercial buildings, towers, is that there's an inherent conflict from the commercial side of things where, you know, it's our superannuation pensions that are funding, and it's all tied around these leases and the promise to pay money every month and give you your 5 or 10% return in capital growth. So there's always been this conflict between innovation and the security aspect of a building. And I think since April, particularly in Australia, it's become more apparent that we're not just going to go back to before. So I think from our side, it's maybe been obvious for many years, but from the owner's side and the developer side and investor side, I think they're starting to get the message. And there's going to be, I think, all sorts of opportunities to reinvent the workplace. Building.
Thank you. Anyone from the audience would like to?
Follow up on that. So do you find, because you started with that point, that the experience across the globe has been very different in the last few years. Do you find that, say, in the eastern states of Australia, clients have become more receptive, more willing to sort of look ahead because of the experience we get in, say, Melbourne City, compared to other parts of the world where we haven't had people working from home, trying to entice them to come back, seeing people leave. Do you think there's a bigger shift in workplace actually and openness to experiment?
Definitely. And I think, you know, one of the conservative forces is, you know, it's a risk to our business, or I don't trust that my people are going to be able to work. And that's been proven to be completely false. I mean, the surprising thing for many organisations is their productivity's gone up. Now, whether it's sustainable in the long term, so no one knows. But yeah, there's been some shifts, and I think you know, it will vary very much city by city, place by place. I mean, you can't work from home if you live in a 1-bedroom flat with 6 other people in Hong Kong, or New York, or London, or perhaps even Sydney. So, you know, this idea that we know what the answer is and it's going to be X, and let's just all go and do that. I don't think it's anywhere near clear yet. And you know, there are people that say, oh, it's all about collaboration, that's what's going to happen. But that's not true. I mean, the work we're seeing is that, you know, places like Adelaide and Perth, where our clients have come back, a lot of people are going either to separate their home and work life, or because they actually want to go and do quiet, concentrated work. So it's not as clear cut as what everyone seems to be talking about. I've never seen so much damn noise about the workplace. I mean, I think I struggled to call myself something 20 years ago. I came up with this idea of workplace strategist. Now everyone's a workplace strategist. It must be the #1 job title in the world at the moment from what you read. It is ridiculous.
Whether it's a good outcome for you, like in terms of being able to create these spaces where you're being more creative and excel in the workplace. And that's what I'm really excited about listening to both of you. It's so inspiring that ways that we thought we had to do things in order to be successful or have achievement is no longer. So I love that idea. Like, where am I sitting to get my task work done? Or how is my team collaborate? So it's to be celebrated.
Yeah, there are some real problems though, like you know, young people that need mentoring and coaching or whatever, really suffering. You know, you take law firms, you showed some examples. The young lawyers want to come in and meet each other and learn from the partners have got wineries and beach houses, and they're having a fabulous time. You know, didn't know I could just phone this in and still, and by the way, you know, we now got rid of half of our space, so my profit as a partner's gone up considerably because we need a lot less space.
But I think to that point, Lauren, the flip side of that as well is that you can now have the conversation in a really genuine way. Like I know in the past, we'll talk about, even when I remember ABW was new in this idea of we have different activities and they could be in different locations. And, you know, there was that whole piece about you don't do everything in the same spot in your house, so why do you do it in the workplace? And there was sort of these analogies that you were trying to create to help people understand, whereas now they get it. They go, okay, I can do this differently. So the conversation, I think, can now be a bit deeper about what are the opportunities. And then I think it is that complexity now of that everyone's experience has been different. So how do we help people who do want to be in all the time? And like these hybrid events, it's such a good thing because now you don't feel like you're missing out if you're doing one thing or the other. But how do we accommodate that? Because technology is challenging and there's other things and, you know, all of those other dimensions. But I think from a human perspective, it's a really lovely moment to be able to have that conversation.
And can I ask, so obviously from your presentations, Claire's going to be a good place to come back to one way or the other.
Yeah.
So it's a good place for you please. I've got a lot of nice places to look forward to.
With lots of timber by the looks of it.
Yes, on walls and ceilings especially. Yes.
Yeah.
What do you see as like the critical points? Obviously there's an overall look and feel, but what's sort of the hitting points that are becoming really critical for workplaces to include?
I think it comes back to that piece that we are all humans and we do want to connect, then there's differences. So you need that heart of your workplace. So whether that is, you know, your social gathering point, whether it is for smaller places, just a tea point or somewhere for people to come together, but there is going to need to be that spot that people can come and feel connected. I mean, other than that, we've debated this, you know, are there any desks? Are there any this? Are there any, you know, what beyond that is, I think, really up for grabs now. But as long as everyone can come together and feel like they belong and truly can connect to one another, the rest of it's up. And a coffee machine.
We've
As you know
actually,
me, we do need coffee.
You mentioned it with ABW. Like we started this work 20 years ago, expanding the range of work settings.
Yeah.
And I think we've got pretty damn good at it. Like the first booths, you know, the heights were, you know, we kind of know what we're doing now, and there's now this rich menu. So we've almost got all the bits, I think, and hospitality's moving in.
Yeah.
I think what's changed is that if we've got more people remote, it changes the sort of the values and the culture of the organisation that's going to be successful. Like legacy organisations, hierarchy, all these learned behaviours or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not going to cut it anymore. So the startup firms are a much better spot. So I think there's a lot of work going to be done around the organisations themselves. And then how do they create the space to reinforce whatever those values or cultural behaviours that they want to really promote as their own to differentiate themselves.
And that's kind of the most critical part we're about to come up to now is, you know, touch wood, we start to open up and things are happening, is not reverting back to those old ways and thinking, oh, well, that was just a blip, let's go back. I think we kind of owe it to everyone. They've been through this experience. How do we now evolve? And I think that's going to be the part of this great relearning, is really for organisations to go, okay, well, what are our core values? What service are we delivering? What do we need? And how can we start to create better balance? Because there's a huge amount of that can come out of that. You know, there's a lot of parity we've seen from everyone being back at home, and there's, you know, still varying levels. But I think now, knowing that hybrid and these kind of versatility can support things, I think we can start to get more diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
I've got a question here online, and this is too bold question. James suggesting that everyone now is a workplace strategist. So we have Lara asking, what are the formally recognised credentials to be a workplace strategist? But I think it'd be fair to expand that, if you could comment on the process behind it. And I think you mentioned before that really nobody wants to sign a 10-year lease. So people are not willing to plan as far. So how does that workplace strategy come to play?
Well, there's so many ways I could answer this. I could get really angry, or I could just be calm. Look, it's like any term gets messed up with overuse. And look, the real strategy part is like, you know, let's face it, most of what we're creating is buildings and spaces for businesses to do what they do and be profitable and all of that. So, you know, when I first started, we were dealing with, you know, when we started on the NAV journey like 20 years ago, we used to sit down with the business strategists that had a little space on the executive floor, and they were like the smartest people you'd ever met. And we were spending a lot of time with them, understanding like where was the future going, and almost acting more like translators between that and the space, and anticipating it. So, you know, I think workplace strategies become a byword now for someone you talk to pull together your brief quickly.
Yeah.
It's kind of devalued as a term. There are no formal qualifications that I know. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. There's design courses or whatever, but there's no you know, when I'm looking for people to employ, I don't say I want this particular degree. You actually, I think, to do it properly, you need a whole blend of things. You need to be really interested in organisations and clients and business, and that's why I think a lot of designers are wired differently. And some of the best workplace strategists I've had have actually come from the business side, that have a passion for design, rather than designers that have an interest in business.
Yeah.
But you need, you know, as I showed in my group, you know, I've got anthropologists, I've got urban planners, I've got data people. I mean, as the world's got more complex, you know, the diversity of skills you need is increasing to do it properly.
I think the translator is a good term, because when you're in that space working in strategy, you are talking to the most senior execs of some of the biggest global organizations. So you have to have that understanding of their world so that you can speak a language that is different to be able to extract from them. And it's those big, beautiful questions. How do you get the right questions to understand the vision? And then that is that translation piece that then goes back to the design team and understanding the fundamentals and what is going to be important, but the people side as well. And that's where the anthropologists come into their own, to understand the culture and where an organisation is going to. And so how does that evolve and then translate into physical space?
But I would argue also you've got to be a designer, because good workplace strategy it's not the end of the briefing process, it's the beginning of the design process. So you need to, I believe, be able to think in 3 dimensions, which is not common or normal. You have to be able to know the language of design, and you have to be able to conceptualize things so that, you know, I think one of the things, you know, we started doing years ago, which wasn't common, it started off being called programming. The Americans called it programming, and then, you know, strategic facility planning, and then strategy. The big shift was actually to start drawing it at the strategy stage, and that's when we really started to see the designs take off, because we didn't have that misstep between the communication. Good question, though.
It wasn't mine, so I won't take credit for it. So Lara's been to our events a few times, so thank you for
She's a serial questioner.
She is, yes, and she's a very talented designer, so it will be well used. Blake, was there anything that I missed? I know a lot of people have been chatting a lot.
I actually have a question that's addressed to yourself, James. You had a beautiful quote from Bill Gates in relation to overestimating the next 2 years and underestimating the next 10 years. And you talked a bit about, at the media hype, the effect on the workplace, and how we're going back to kind of all at home or all not sort of hybrid at home. Do you feel is there an undercurrent or something that we are underestimating that's going to greatly impact us over the next 10 years?
I think we've sort of over and underdone a couple. I think we've underdone the human contact and the importance of. Well, I think we've done an incredible disservice to a generation of children growing up with the technology that they've looked at, and we're going to have to kind of break them in. You know, anxiety at schools is at about 50%. I mean, it's unbelievable, and those people are going to be entering the workforce, and companies are going to have to help them to do that. So I think we've completely underestimated the human. I think we've overestimated the resilience of the old, and I would hope, the same way, I saw things like co-working, 25 years ago in Europe, and it was like, oh, this is obvious, this is going to take over the world. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then WeWork came along, oh, wow, what's this amazing thing? It's like, and the only reason WeWork worked is because they took leases. So they didn't change the actual real estate model. They fitted into the financial model. And they clearly, overstretched and messed it up. But there's things take forever. So I would hope that we actually start to see new building typologies and new kind of leasing and a new financial valuation model that is, just as profitable for our superannuation funds as the current one, or even more profitable because we're, selling more coffees per square metre and doing other things. So, I think there's two sides to that question.
Interesting, thank you.
There's a few more coming through online. Let me just see if I can understand it. We'll start wrapping it up after a couple of questions. So if anyone has last calls, don't be shy. Now's your last chance. So we'll see designer firms offer micro design services for large company employees working from home office requirements paid. Does that make sense to you?
Essentially saying that we'd set up home.
Yeah, I think I can run with that.
Okay,
So, the idea that we would tailor smaller scale
Yeah.
design support for people, and that organisations would use specialist designers maybe to do, rather than a generalist doing an ABW neighbourhood, you might have a specialist hospitality, and I could definitely see that.
Yeah,
happen.
absolutely. And I think there'll be that shift to more of the hub and spoke and seeing these little hybrid hubs popping up. And I think this is where that co-working idea that you're talking about from 25 will start to actually take off on its own. So I think you'll see that, and I think that will be leveraged off developers, I get the sense, and probably hoteliers as well will start to play in that space. So I can see that definitely evolving. I hope it does.
Yeah, there's definitely work to do at the home office for sure. I mean, that is generally pretty poor for most people.
Absolutely. And that has been an interesting part of conversation with organisations we're talking to, and they're trying to grapple with how do they set those up, and what is it, a support, a monetary thing? Is it, how does that all work? So I think that'll be another hot topic as people are moving around as well. The Great Resignation starts to demand other things. So it'll be interesting to see what it drives.
I think we'll start wrapping up. I'll end with a bit of a peculiar question. What do you see the main sort of challenge for workplaces changing over? So immediately, as well as being prepared to wait for their final result.
That's too hard. You can go first.
All right, I'll go first. People. I think there'll be, as we've seen through the whole workplace journey, there's some early adopters and people who are happy to go out and test ideas. I think there's always a lot of money at stake, so people are nervous to be the first ones to take the leap. So I think for some organisations, unfortunately, that will slip back into that way. I do worry that for some people it will be management or leaders who aren't ready to take that jump yet. So I think that's probably our biggest challenge. It's a good one, and everyone's got different parts of their journey. So for me, that's the biggest opportunity, is to talk to people about that. I think it's our biggest challenge. Yeah,
I agree. I think the organisations themselves, their ability to change is really, we're working with clients right now where the people want one thing, the management wants something else, and the board wants something entirely, and the board's just way out of step. Like I think they think that there's a public perception that if everyone doesn't come back, they won't think that they're working. But that sort of tripartite kind of disconnect for organisations to, quickly work out what is their new purpose and how does space, office, smashing up HR and technology into it, and working through that pretty quickly, because it's, leases are expiring every month, and decisions are going to, a lot of clients have held back on decisions and kick the can down the road. We're going to run out of time at some point where, how much space do we take? What do we do with it? They're going to be necessary questions.
Maybe that's what it's about. It's not worrying about getting it right first time, knowing that there's going to be this testing period and experimenting for the next few years. So just have a crack and then see what happens, and be prepared to evolve and grow, rather than waiting to get it perfect and then
messing it up anyway.
And I think the good thing over the last 20 years, we've completely evolved our industry. You know, the design talent, the case studies, the suppliers, you know, it's out of this world compared to what it was. And I think, you know, we stand really good stead globally. So if anyone's going to do it, we'll do it.
Yeah. Good time to be a designer, I reckon.
And thanks for having us.
No,
It's
thank
really
you so
nice to
much.
be able to go out and meet people.
Yes, so it's lovely to have an audience in here. So I think for our online audience, thank you for joining us and asking questions. There will be a replay for the guys online available if you need to go over some details. For the live audience, please stay back. There's plenty of drinks, plenty of food. Say hello to each other now that we're finally can. And I'm sure our wonderful presenters will be open to answer some more questions. So thank you very much. It was a very exciting topic. It does sound from what you're saying, we might have to do this same topic again in 6 months' time. We'll pull up some of your notes and maybe compare what's happened. But thank you very much. We really enjoyed the presentation.